Hi, my name is GennaRose Nethercott. I am a poet, and Rebecca from Trubadour has sent me a list of questions for me to answer for you guys, just telling you a little bit about me and what I do and my experience working as a full-time poet. So I'm going to just sort of read off her questions and go down the list and answer them, and hopefully you can gain something from it, and it should be a good time. So let's see. First question is, what did you learn upon teaching two other women to do poems to order? Have you noticed an increase in demand in your work in a group versus when you're alone? So I guess that merits the statement, the sort of pre-introduction, that one of the things that I do as a poet is I write poems to order. People give me a topic, I compose a poem on the spot on the topic of their choice. And recently I have trained up a couple of co-workers, the amazing poets Julia Story and Cassandra de Alba, who are both based in Somerville, Massachusetts, and we're working as a team together. So yeah, to answer that question, for me the biggest change in having these two join the team is that it becomes a community thing. Now it's not me alone typing poems, we have a gang. It's like being in a band, and that's really exciting for me. And so it's learning about, for one, not being so such a lone wolf, I guess, and how to work in a team, how to split labor up evenly, the same way you would with any co-working situation. And in terms of an increase for demand, yeah, I mean, we have 3 times as many people to get the word out about what we do, so that definitely helps a lot. It's a lot of fun, and they're great. But we're called the Traveling Poetry Emporium, for what it's worth. Give us a Google. All right, next question. On the notion that, quote, poetry doesn't sell, she says, has your work doing poems to order and other commission projects given you a view on poetry's commercial viability that you'd say is different from most other poets you know? Why or why not? I'd say to that, yes, I think I do think of poetry as a viable financial career for myself. And part of the reason that I do is because I got so pissed off with this idea that poetry doesn't sell and poetry doesn't pay, and that to be a poet you have to have a day job. And not that having a day job is a negative thing or something to avoid, because having a day job does definitely give you a lot of, for one, content to write about. You can't just write and not like be a person, because you'll have nothing to write about. And 2, there are many wonderful things to do in this world other than just write poetry. But for me, I did really want to prove that that wasn't the only option, that it wasn't a requirement to do something else for money other than poetry. And so it was that kind of general spite about that concept that made me decide I wanted to find other ways that would make poetry viable as a way for me to pay my rent and to buy food. And survive on. And so that really did involve thinking outside of the box, and also acknowledging that doing commissioned work that I would be paid for does require a compromise in a way. It's not only writing about what I care about all the time. It's sort of a collaboration in a way, where it's writing about what I care about, and also knowing I should be writing about what someone else cares about too if I'm doing a commissioned work. So it's sort of a reframing of the way that I think about poetry. I write very differently when I'm writing my own work versus when I'm writing commissioned work. So yeah, I guess I do think about it differently in that way because I have to. Let's see, what's next? Okay. So she asks, in revising The Lumberjack's Dove for publication through the National Poetry Series, what considerations has Louise Glick brought to your poems and or your process? What has been the most unexpected feedback for your improvement in artistic growth? So this is in regards to the fact that a manuscript of mine called The Lumberjack's Dove was just selected as a winner of the National Poetry Series, which is amazingly exciting to me. And it was selected by Louise Glick, who has been working with me on the editing process. So she has been mentoring me and working with the manuscript. And honestly, I think the thing that's been the most kind of unexpected and educational and fulfilling for me is that I found 90% of Louise's edits on the book were things that I already in the back of my head knew weren't great. I knew needed tweaking, but kind of hoped no one would notice and it could slide under the radar. So I think the biggest benefit to me, and the thing I've learned the most, is how important it is to have someone else working with your work. Not even necessarily because they'll find things that you never would have found on your own, but because they won't let you get away with shit. They won't let you be lazy if you have a good editor. And also it's just reminded me of how important and how joyous it is to have other poets in your life and to have that kind of community where you're talking with someone who really understands what you're doing, and how affirming that is. So I just really missed being in a workshopping context, as I really hadn't been able to do that since I was in college. And it really made me want that back again. So yeah, workshopping is fun, and it's fun to be around people who are excited about the same things you're excited about. All right, question number 4. Rebecca says, can you talk about the Modern Ballads project and the word modern in the Modern Ballads project? What do you think is especially urgent or timely in them now regarding their content composition and or motivation? So to start, the Modern Ballads project is a series of ballads that I wrote, narrative poems that are being set to music, each by a different band, on an album that's about to come out. We are kickstarting for it right now, and we're in the final 4 days of the Kickstarter. So it's going to be amazing. And the bands involved are all some of my favorite bands. And the modern element of it, I think, is really interesting and relevant because in order to write these, I studied many traditional ballads that were written hundreds of years ago, and I sort of plundered them in a way for their meters and their rhyme schemes, their forms, their stanza breakdown, as well as content-wise tropes and motifs, and then applied those old forms to contemporary stories. And I think the word modern and the modernity of it and its current relevance is actually all tied into sort of its ancientness in a way as well, where the reasons that these older ballads that I was studying to write the new ones endured for so long is because they were sort of timeless. They were always relevant. And they successfully tapped into some core aspect of what it feels like to be a person. And so for me, working on this new set of ballads, that was kind of my main goal, is no matter what story I'm telling, no matter how fantastical, you know, there's shapeshifters and there's magic and there's, you know, bizarre, strange happenings, ghosts and what have you, the core of every single one had to be somehow about just what it means to be a person, and it had to stem from an actual emotional center. And so I think that is where their relevance lies so much. Linguistically, they are modernized in certain ways, even though they do deal often in sort of antiquated tropes, or retell older folktales. The language I've used does bring them up into the present, but I think the real thing that keeps them relevant, and that was the heart of that relevance, is the fact that if you listen to them, ideally you should be able to relate to them. And my hope is people relate to them now as modern people alive today, and also that maybe people can relate to them in 100 years as well, as people can with the ballads I studied in order to create them. Okay, number 5. Regarding your decision to make Modern Ballads a larger collaboration with renowned folk musicians like the Lonely Heartstring Band, what inspired you to ask Wait, what inspired you to ask if they'd want to work on the project? Was there anything in particular that you were looking for in each artist's music that suggested a fruitful partnership? Basically, at the core of it, I invited bands whose music I really loved. So most of the bands on the album are bands that I listen to all the time and really adore. And sort of like, I came up with my dream lineup of who would I most want to hear sing a song that I wrote, and then I reached out to that band and asked if they would sing one of the songs. And the other thing is some of these bands are people I've worked with in the past and are friends, and so I knew that they did good work. And I knew what it was like to work with them. I think whenever you're choosing a collaborator, those are kind of the two main things. On the one hand, you've got to love what they do, and you have to be excited about their work, obviously, or else why would you collaborate with them? And on the other hand, it's important that you trust their ability to actually follow through. And with all the bands on this album, they have both of those halves. I love their music, and I know that they do kick-ass work. So yeah. And let's see. Oh, last question. My thoughts on, can anyone love poetry, and can anyone be a poet? Well, the first half of that question, can anyone love poetry? I think absolutely yes. You have to find the right poems. You have to find the poems that fit you. And I think that it's sort of like anything. It's kind of like saying, can anyone love music, or can anyone love sculpture? It's such a wide variety of works within each of these categories. To say I love poetry is almost kind of a silly statement because it's so all-encompassing. Like, you don't love all poetry, you love the poetry that speaks to you. And the same goes for the reverse in terms of, can anyone be capable of loving poetry? Well, of course, but they've got to find the poems that are relevant to them and that sort of serve as a mirror for their own feelings and experiences. And can anyone be a poet? Again, I would say yes. I think that being a poet is a lot like being a potter, for example. I've been learning pottery lately, and I've been finding some sort of parallels here, where, yes, anyone can be a potter, but you aren't going to throw clay on the wheel and make a beautiful pot the very first time you sit down at a wheel. And I think the same is true for a poem. Anyone can learn to craft a poem, but like any skill, it takes time and it takes practice and it takes dedication to hone into being able to use that toolbox of language in order to convey the thing you want it to convey. And that's really, I think, the goal of poets, is to convey a specific thing that you are attempting to convey. In the same way as a potter's goal is to be able to create a shape that you're imagining in your mind and make that shape the way you want it to be. So yeah, you can be a poet, anyone can be a poet. Just takes, actually working at it and writing and caring about it. And yeah, so that is that. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you so much, Rebecca and Trubadour, for sending me these questions. Have a good day. Bye.